Category is Emerald City Realness. Thank you for joining me for part 2 of my green guest room makeover, where we go for the gold in bronze, brass, antique gold, and all sorts of materials, creating a beautiful gallery wall that I think is worthy of the Wizard of Oz. Or in my case, you could say the Wizard of Odd. Follow me on this yellow brick road and let's see where it takes us. So as this is the green room, the green guest room in my rainbow home, I wanted to make sure that I picked colors of green that I thought would be flattering for different skin tones, because as a makeup artist, I think about those things, how the green reflects on you. I kind of start with a shade that I think is close to what I want to get to, and then I add pigments that I picked up at the hardware store in order to get it to be the tone that I really like. And one of the reasons I picked a bit deeper shade for this wall is because I really wanted the metal finishes to pop on them, kind of like I've seen in museums with antique gold frames and those kind of things. So I wanted to give that vibe of almost like being in an overly decorated ornate museum wall in this gallery wall. Something that you'll notice is that even if the materials are the same, like brass, a lot of them are made of brass, some of them are painted gold, but they all have slightly different tones to them because they're from slightly different times, different materials. I like seeing that variety, and I like feeling like dimensionality whenever I'm working with shades. If you would like them to be a bit more uniform, you can polish them to get them to a similar finish if you want them to be a little bit brighter and newer. Even though they're antique, making them have a little bit brighter finish. And I'm appreciating the nuance and variation in them. And I like how they all have a different world of gold and bronze and different finishes. And part of the visual interest when I look around the room and look at the wall. Something that's important with this kind of maximalist gallery wall is to understand that it's a labor of love. It's something that shows your passion for your collections and the time spent with things. It's not something that I could just go and pick up at one store, one-stop shopping. When you're going for a more maximalist aesthetic is for it to not just look like clutter. It's okay if it looks busy to me, but I think that the difference often lies in how curated it is. And so if something is curated, like it's chosen and selected to go with other pieces that are kind of similar, but then it shows that you made an effort of like grouping like things together, even though they come from all different kinds of people and even sometimes from different time periods, but they kind of work together. And so when you're going to make a large grouping of objects, try to think of, do they have a similar theme? Do they have a similar vibe, a similar time period, a similar shape? They could be from different time periods, but have a shape that looks harmonious together. Maximalism, a lot of times, is really about curating your collections and presenting them and sharing them with people, not just having them locked up in the attic or the basement or the storage unit. So I finally wanted to be able to display a lot of these ornate frames that I've been collecting and trying to use them in a way that I could kind of fill up a whole gallery wall with ornate antique frames. I think the best maximalist displays are usually things that have been collected over time with care and passion, admiration or love, or whatever it is that you're passionate about. In this case, people could say mirrors are a sign of vanity, but I work in fashion. I've been working with beauty and fashion for most of my adult life, so I think it's allowed to have a little bit over-the-top mirror room in my house. Something that I think is important to consider is a kind of rule that a lot of people who are interior designers, they usually talk about trying to maintain a sort of cohesion with the architecture of your home. For me, that's a rule that I'm willing to break in my own space, because this is a space that's made for me to host people, invite friends who often are creative people who appreciate my eccentric fashion and style, and I want to create an experience for them. I also want to have a space that they might want to take a picture for their social media or something for. It's something that I think that my friends will enjoy, and it's also reflective of my eccentric, over-the-top kind of taste. Even though I had a pretty clear concept for this gallery wall, It's one thing to have it in mind, and then the other thing to really make it come to the point that you really want it to get to. And I think that what I learned, at least from making this gallery wall, that's different from some other gallery walls that I've done, is that because these frames are not symmetrical, a lot of them are literally like asymmetrical and based on some old Versailles mirror that's carved and sticks out a lot on one side and not on the other. Even though some of the pieces are actually similar shaped, they, when you repeat them on the sides, one of them sticks out farther than the other. So you can't really get the exact spacing that is very symmetrical like you can when you're dealing with rectangular frames. So that's the biggest challenge, I think, with making this gallery wall, but it's also part of the fun. And you kind of have to think, when you're creating something that's a little bit balanced on a center axis, kind of reflected, that it's never going to be exactly the same on one side and the other, and you have to be okay with that, which is a little bit hard for somebody that's a little bit OCD like I am. But as I've learned in my art practice and in a lot of my creative endeavors, you have to release a little bit of control and a little bit of perfection. Perfection is an unrealistic idea sometimes that you can't actually achieve in reality. You know, whatever, if you want perfect symmetry, it's not going to happen. Be okay with harmony and prioritize that over symmetry, especially when you're dealing with asymmetrically shaped frames. The other thing that I think is important is how I approach this. So I start with the largest pieces first. And the way that I position them is literally by lying down in the bed and seeing it be kind of centered with the bed headboard, and then trying to see what I can see reflected if I hang the mirror higher or lower. First, I positioned these extra large mirrors, or the largest pieces, and I wanted those to be the center point, and I also wanted them to reflect well when you're on the bed lying down. You kind of see different levels of reflection, the room reflecting back and forth, which to me is really exciting and fun and interesting. But, you know, if you follow philosophies more of feng shui, like you kind of don't want so much movement with the mirrors bouncing and reflecting around. But for this vibe, I'm going more Western European vibe with a bit more maximalist, like kind of Baroque style. And for me, it's fun and it's interesting when you can see those reflections from the bed. That's kind of how I decided the positioning of the very largest pieces, was to make them kind of centered and at a height that would create a frame that's interesting when you see it from the point of view of being on the bed, but also that are at heights when you walk by. It can be interesting to see what's in that reflection at your eye level. Having worked with, you know, like TED speakers like Sinead Burke from Ireland, she's really inspirational and enlightened me a lot about some challenges that little people have that are different from tall humans. And so I thought in designing this room that by having mirrors at different levels, you can always find a mirror that's your height to look in, to take a selfie in for whatever height you are. If you're enjoying this content and you want to live your life in Technicolor and live a little bit more creatively, like and subscribe below for more content like this. So the fact that I was able to find 4 mirrors with the same shape is really cool. 2 of them had mirrors in it and 2 of them were just the frame. And I thought I could get a mirror to replace and put them inside of that frame. But I actually kind of liked that it just framed the green wall and gave a little bit of green. And I also feel that it allows me, if I want to in the future, to evolve the decoration of the room and create more artwork that I put in there. I can take photos and put it in there. I can do my own painting and insert it in that frame that's there. Creates movable artwork. Whenever you move, you kind of see something different from a different angle. And it's like those Harry Potter portraits that are alive or something. I think it's kind of like you walk by the mirror and every step you take shows you a little bit different image or a different reflection. And for me, that's fun. Another aspect of creating this gallery wall is to include some variety. I tried to mix it up with the largest pieces first, and then I went and I filled in the gaps with smaller pieces that I found. Sometimes you're lucky and you find 2 of a kind. Whenever you find those 2 of a kind, don't split them up. And I use them in a kind of symmetrical way on different sides, kind of branching out from the center axis, but then it gets less symmetrical as it goes out, because also there's much more space in the room on the right side. And so that's where I start developing into some other frames. And you're going to see I also have an ornate coat rack that I put behind the door so you can hang things behind the door. It's still in an ornate style. But when you look from the bed position, you kind of see the symmetry and you get the vibe of balance that I was going for. At first, the idea was to have all mirrors. And I thought even when I bought these picture frames that have some kind of artwork that's from some famous works of art, but a reproduction in a smaller version, etc. I thought I could exchange or change out all of those images just for mirrors. But I felt like it added a different amount of depth by adding different images that are from historic painting styles or even old photographs. I have one of some guy, I think he's some Portuguese guy that I found in the frame at the flea market in Lisbon, Portugal. Oh, I have to do a video where I take you guys and show you some of my favorite spots for getting vintage pieces in Europe and in other countries whenever I visit. I am so passionate about thrifting that I'm sure those of you that have found me on here can really appreciate it. I love the hunt. I love the satisfaction of finding something that has belonged to somebody before, has some history, makes you feel that there's a story behind it. You can imagine stories in your own mind, make up your own narratives, but also just that you're not creating new stuff that's going to go into a landfill. One way to achieve having this variety and visual interest, even though it's on a flat wall, is to get different items that have a little bit different dimensionality to them. So most of these frames are ornate and they're three-dimensional and they're kind of sculpted or carved looking, but I also have some that are like little pedestals that stick out of the wall, like we have to put candles on, or you can put some little knickknacks or items that you find, and that creates something on a vertical space, but that you can also switch out if you want to put different items and objects. And that also gives a nice variety to the wall. You just have to have enough space when you walk by so that you don't bump into these things. I wanted to make sure that the different frames and different little pedestals were all firmly attached to the wall. Something that I'm dealing with that's a little different than some people maybe who have homes in North America, which are often built out of wooden frames and those kind of things. You have to look for studs and you're kind of drilling holes into drywall. Here, a lot of the buildings in Europe are made out of masonry and are kind of covered with a plaster finish. So you have to drill holes, but when you drill those holes, you can't just like put in a nail really easily. But when you drill in a hole, it will hold. It's gonna stay there. It can hold a lot of weight. And I don't mind making a lot of holes in the wall to hang these items because afterwards you can kind of always fill them in. But what it means is that if you put it in there, it's gonna hold and it can hold a lot of weight. So there's that advantage to it. Some people might be hesitant to put a lot of holes in their walls. And I think that a lot of people, especially that I've seen on YouTube, they do a lot of things with command strips and like Velcro that you put the frames on the wall with Velcro. And that's something that's great if you don't want to make a lot of holes in your wall. But for me, because I want these to be really secure whenever anybody walks by them, that they won't snag their clothing on it and pull a mirror off the wall and break it. I want everything to be kind of secured with a real strong screw that goes into the masonry wall. And if I decide to move something, or as I've been doing this, I've made some mistakes and I needed to reposition because a lot of these mirrors, even the ones that are kind of similar in size, they're slightly different. The 4 mirrors that look the same, they're all slightly different sizes, and they have the hooks on the back in slightly different positions. So if I tried to switch them around, they're gonna hang at different heights. So it was a bit of a challenge trying to find the right kind of balance for these frames. But the thing that I do know is that they're screwed in really well and that they're going to be very stable and secure. For some of the smaller pieces, I used a command strip for a few things that are really lightweight, and if they fall, it's not going to break with any glass or anything like that. Welcome to our green guest room. this YouTube thing. I'd love to hear your comments and suggestions below so that I can kind of see what you enjoy most. I talk a lot, but I'm trying to just share some of my creative experience as an artist who's lived his life with creativity, and I feel like eccentricity that makes my life a little bit more fun. I'd love to give you a little bit of that, encourage you to step outside your comfort zone, just one step. You don't have to go as extreme as me, but maybe you're gonna add something that's a little bit more eccentric, a little bit more experimental in your space. For me, it's been a journey to get to this point of eccentricity. Going from a little bit more standard, trying to fit in when I was in high school, to really embracing my difference and being inspired by people that I would see on the subway who seemed to, dress and live with eccentricity, not even seemingly caring about the negative reactions they might get from people. Please subscribe if you want to continue to follow me down this yellow brick road as it takes us to realms of rainbow and even a mustard family room makeover. Let's go. And don't forget Toto.
Pay no attention to that man behind